Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve and today we're taking a look at how many Brentford and Brighton players we're going to need for double game week 27. Now to timestamp this, I am recording after all the fixtures have been played in game week 26. It's Tuesday the 7th of March, 2 PM New Zealand time, which is about 1 o'clock in the morning UK time. And before we go into how many Brentford and Brighton players, I will need to quickly catch everyone up to speed on what the plans were running into this game week, because some things changed very late last game week. And if you have been following the channel, you will know what the plans were last week, which was to sell Salah to bring in McAllister. So this was my team in game week 25. I'd bought Salah in for one game week just as a covering play for their double. I didn't think that I should have brought in any more Liverpool players for that game week. And I rolled a transfer playing with 10 players with the pre-planned moves of going Salah down to McAllister and Bueno up to a range of options. What the most typical options I was looking at was actually James or a Estupiñán, but with the hamstring injury to James and a Estupiñán being flagged, my plans changed slightly, and so I thought I should catch everyone up to speed. Also running into game week 25, Nketiah was basically nailed, but for both games in the Arsenal double, Nketiah was on the bench for both of them, only playing 20 minutes at the end of both matches. And he was then flagged at the end of the game week. And so after I released last week's video, I had to make some different decisions very late in the game week. And the results were that I still followed through with my plan of Salah down to McAllister, which was looking awesome after the first round of fixtures, with Brighton coming away with a 4-0 victory, McAllister getting a goal and an assist from his new position, playing in the number 10, with Lallana out for some time. I was looking at either bringing in a Estupiñán or James, like I said, but James had picked up a hamstring injury. There's also the Champions League fixture that was looking quite likely. And so we pretty much immediately ruled out James. Estupiñán was also flagged before the game week. And so I actually made the decision to delay the Estupiñán purchase until this game week, because I knew Tarkowski has been sitting on my team as a short-term hold that I'm going to transfer out probably for Estupiñán or maybe Lewis Dunk, or probably Estupiñán. And it is probably going to happen this week, but we still need to weigh that up because things have changed slightly since then. So I went against both Estupiñán and James and ended up bringing in Zinchenko. The reasons for that is Zinchenko looks about as nailed as it gets in that Arsenal defensive unit. He's an absolute bonus point magnet, and game weeks 26, 27, 28 were Bournemouth at home, Fulham away, Crystal Palace at home. Great set of fixtures. He does play in game week 29. It's against Leeds. Is it at home or away? I can't actually remember. Leeds at home in 29. And so I also knew that if I did get stuck with Zinchenko, I didn't mind getting stuck with him because his fixture run was pretty good. He's got no blanks, and so he's a relatively safe purchase to bring in. And the reason I had to go with safety was because I was also taking a hit to get rid of Nketiah and bring in Ivan Toney, who was on 8 yellow cards. So 2 more and he will get this 2-game suspension. He managed to come through that fixture unscathed, thankfully. Scored a penalty, got 2 bonus points, which is awesome. But he's still sitting on 8 yellows. And he also has those betting allegations that are now no longer allegations. He has pleaded guilty to a whole bunch of those. And so we had to weigh all that up late last week, and I decided to take the hit and actually gamble on bringing Ivan Toney in. So thankfully he avoided his yellow card. He did come away with the points, which is awesome. On the overall deal, I am down 3 points with the hit though. So Salah, man, Liverpool 7-0 over United. Just no one saw that coming. It was a freakish match to watch, largely driven by, I think, the attitude of a lot of the United players. It was very disappointing to watch as a United supporter, not just because of the result, but also how they handled the result. At like 3-0 down, they basically gave up, which was pathetic, to be completely honest, from a bunch of professional lads that should be rallying together as a team. I won't go into it too much. It was pretty hard to watch. But Salah got 21 points, and Nketiah got 0. Which means I would have actually got Andreas off the bench had I not gone for the move with his 8 points. And Bueno got 0 points, so I also would have pulled Trippier off the bench. So overall that would have been about 30 points had I not made any moves. McAllister in, Toney in, and Zinchenko in netted me a total of 23 points. Minus the 4-point hit actually left me on 19, so I was a lot worse off after the auto subs would have been taken into account. I mean, I got the 8 points from Toney. I would have got 8 points from Andreas. It was just one of those weeks in FPL. It was crazy. That 21 point swing from Salah was just huge. Nunez got in the action. Gakpo got in the action. They kept their clean sheets. So everyone who held on to Trent, Robertson, etc. all came away with points. It was a pretty horrific week all around. However, in terms of my overall plan and building towards Bench Boost 29, I'm actually one transfer ahead of plan now, and I actually did make some points on the deal overall. So selling Salah was a mistake at the end of it, but if we take that out, I was actually ahead of plan. I still think it was the correct moves, even though it has absolutely burnt me on the whole. I'm about 6 points off my safety score as a result of the Liverpool result. So all in all, it didn't hurt me too bad. I still have my wildcard as well. A lot of managers out there did wildcard out their Liverpool assets, so I still have that in my back pocket and am looking to line that up to hopefully regain what's just happened with that Liverpool result in future. And so I do think I do have a good advantage over a lot of the competition. But that's where we're at right now. So we've pulled forward the Toney transfer, which was going to be my move for gameweek 27 anyway, to bring him in for his double and probably captain him if he hadn't picked up his 9th yellow card, which he hasn't. So this is how the team's looking at the moment. I've got Ivan Toney in place and McAllister in place. So I've got 2 doublers, one from each of Brighton and Brentford. And I'm now looking at the transfer in of Estupinan. Now, the how many Brentford and Brighton players do we need this week, I think should be answered with quality over quantity. Which basically means I am just discounting the Brentford defenders. I am not looking to bring in the likes of Raya as a keeper, or Rico Henry, or Pinnock, or anything like that. I did actually own Rico Henry very early on in the season for about 7 game weeks, I think, and so I was actually watching Brentford quite closely from early on in the season, and I think I picked up about 1 clean sheet across that 7-week spell. It was pretty tough going with the Brentford defence. I haven't seen Brentford miraculously change their overall defensive stats or their defensive output either. I still think they are a team to target in terms of defense, and so this is why I'm pretty reluctant to jump on any of their defensive assets. However, what's changed from last game week is obviously Brentford have a game locked in for game week 28, and so that is something that we do need to consider. So the easiest way, the other thing obviously that I do need to probably bring up is for everyone out there that does have Toney in their teams. Obviously, he's got a double this week. He could pick up a yellow in the first game, a yellow in the second game, and he could be out for 2 games, missing the the game that they do now have locked in for game week 28, which was, this is part of the gamble of bringing Ivan Toney in as on a hit last week. I decided to go with it and hope that he just doesn't pick up any yellows. My theory behind that was, I think Toney's going to want to play as many games as he can before the FA makes their decision. And to bring you up to speed on that, the FA is not likely to have that hearing scheduled until about April. There is no date set yet, but it's looking like that. Like Toney's made a whole bunch of submissions to the FA. They need to take all that into consideration before they set a hearing date, which is likely to be early April. Game week 29, the first game for Brentford, is on the 1st of April. And so, fingers crossed that the hearing doesn't get announced before then, so he might get through this double, play his game in game week 28, and then still be available to play those games in game week 29, at which point we'll probably look to move Ivan Toney on, because that hearing will likely happen. He's probably going to be out for a whole bunch of months. So it's a very big gamble bringing Ivan Toney in. We're basically betting that he doesn't get to 10 yellow cards, and that the FA doesn't pull the hearing forward and suspend him all before game week 29. And so that's the gamble that we're running with. And so ideally, I would like to somehow roll a transfer at some point to potentially have to deal with Ivan Toney if he picks up his 2 yellow cards, or if that hearing date gets pulled forward and we need to deal with him. And so there's also that consideration to make in the back of your minds when you're looking at bringing in players and what's going to happen over the next couple of game weeks. So the easiest way that we can look at this is probably, well, I'll just read out my team for those of you especially that don't have the visuals for how it's lining up for game week 27, and then I'll bring up a transfer planner to show you without any transfers this week what it's looking like next week, in order to make a better decision about what to do this week and how many more players that we should or should not load up on, knowing full well that I'm probably not going to be looking at bringing in any Brentford defenders, which I think a lot of players are probably looking at doing this week. So in net, I've got Kepa, who's away to Leicester. Across the back line, I've got Shaw at home to Southampton, Trippier at home to Wolves, and Zinchenko away to Fulham. So all of my backline looking like they've got pretty good games. 2 players playing at home, 2 players playing away. Across the middle of the park, I've got Odegaard away to Fulham. We've got McAllister for his double, away to Leeds and at home to Crystal Palace. So that's a good attacking double for Brighton. It's also a very good defensive double, which is why we are eyeing up the transfer of Tarkowski out for a Stupinan. I've got Rashford at home to Southampton, and Saka also away to Fulham. And then across the front line, I've got Haaland away to Crystal Palace, Harry Kane at home to Nottingham Forest, so another 2 good fixtures there, and Ivan Toney with a great attacking double away to Everton and away to Southampton. Now, because he's still on 8 yellow cards, I'm more than happy to captain him this week, because there's no chance that he's going to be suspended for that Southampton game through yellow cards. I mean, he could still get a red card in that Everton fixture and miss it, but that's the same for any player that would be doubling. And so it's likely going to be Tony captain, unless anything else changes, and McAllister vice captain. I may look to switch that round, but we will weigh up the captaincy a little bit later in the week. On the bench, I've got Andreas, home to Arsenal, Botman at home to Wolves, so that's actually a very good defensive game for Newcastle. However, Joelinton picked up his 10th yellow card in the Newcastle fixture against Man City, and so he is out for 2 weeks. So Bruno Guimaraes has just come back after suspending his 3-game suspension. His first game back was against it was actually in the cup match, but his first Premier League match was last week against Man City. They've now lost their other key man in midfield, which is Joelinton, which will affect the defensive unit of Newcastle, and he is out for the next 2 fixtures. So I think I'd still be benching Botman even if Joelinton was fit, because Zinchenko, Trippier and Shaw all have what I think are probably better fixtures from better teams, with more attacking threat in Trippier over Botman, and Tarkowski is currently sitting 3rd spot on the bench at home to Brentford. Now, if I bring up a transfer planner, so I've not made any transfers here in game week 27, I've just rolled it forward to game week 28. You can see 2 free transfers here, and this is what it would look like with the blanks next week. I've got 5.2 million in the bank. That money from the Salah to McAllister downgrade was tentatively planned in for a James Maddison coming in game week 28, because they do have a fixture in 28, and then in game week 29 they've got a great double away to Crystal Palace and at home to Aston Villa. So that was one of the 2 free transfers, if I don't do anything in game week 27, that I was planning. McAllister blanks, but I have to hold him. I brought him in for the double in 27 and the double in 29. I'm holding Haaland, Rashford and Shaw all on the bench, who all don't have a game in game week 28. And so it's looking likely that I am going to go into game week 28 playing with 10 men, because I'm not going to sell McAllister, Haaland, Rashford or Shaw. There is a strategy of selling Haaland and potentially getting another person in for game week 28 and loading up on someone who would double in game week 29, which we might look at later at the week, but my plan running into this was to just hold Haaland through, and so we'll just have a look at what that's going to look like, assuming I still follow through with the plan. But what you can see in here is I do have Tarkowski with a game as part of that 10 men, but he's away to Chelsea, so this is a horrible fixture. And in game week 29 he plays Tottenham at home, no double, and if I didn't bring in Estupiñán then, I was probably going to bring in Estupiñán in game week 29 as another doubler in order to bench boost in 29 with, I think, 4 single game week players. So if I just put all the single game weekers on the bench, 5 at the moment, sorry. So Odegaard, Saka, Zinchenko, Haaland and Kane are all single game weekers in game week 29. Everyone else is doubling, and I was planning to use my bench boost. Plan is that I may or may not, unsure at this point in time, either sell Odegaard or Zinchenko for their single game week fixture against Leeds to jump on one more doubler, potentially for a hit this week, but we will come up against that when we come up against that. So things to keep in mind here is Tony might not be here, and so we may have to spend a transfer on Ivan Toney. This is why the Zinchenko play was a bit more important, because I knew I was bringing in Ivan Toney. I had to bring in someone that I knew that I might have to hold if Ivan Toney is somehow out of fixtures, and so I might get stuck playing with 5 single game weekers for the bench boost in game week 29. We will see. So the question comes down to, do I bring in Estupiñán this week instead? Tarkowski is currently on the bench, so I wouldn't be playing him. If I did bring in Estupinan for Tarkowski this week, I've got a little bit of a benching headache. I'd want to play Estupinan, but who do I bench? Probably Zinchenko, I'm guessing, because he's got an away fixture to Fulham. Trippier's at home. Shaw's at home. Do I really want to bench Odegaard or Saka away to Fulham? I think that's a pretty good attacking fixture for Arsenal, so I probably don't want to bench them. I don't want to bench Rashford, even though they had a terrible game last week. They are at home to Southampton next week, and so I don't really want to be benching him. Definitely not benching McAllister or Tony. Harry Kane's up against Nottingham Forest at home, and Haaland's playing Crystal Palace away. So I don't think I'd be benching anyone apart from potentially Zinchenko to bring in Estupinan for Leeds away and Crystal Palace at home. And this is kind of the conundrum that I'm looking at. So if I do bring in Estupinan, it's to bench Zinchenko, who could quite easily go and get a clean sheet at Fulham. Estupinan could come away with 2 clean sheets here, of course, and he could come away with some attacking returns because he is the man that is getting quite far forward out of that Brighton defensive unit. Estupinan could also be benched. There is a bit of a risk there. And if I do bring this transfer forward to get these 2 games in now, he blanks in game week 28. And so this would have been Tarkowski, who would have had a fixture, but it would have been away to Chelsea. But so that's not a great fixture, but Estupinan is blanking. So bringing in Estupinan this week to bench Zinchenko, that picks me up 1 extra fixture this week. But then I just completely negate that next week by having Estupinan with no game. I probably wouldn't want to sell Estupinan because he then doubles again in game week 29. So obviously we wouldn't want to be selling him then. And we actually end up having to play game week 28 with 9 players instead of 10. So the way that we have to weigh this up is, will Estupinan pull in enough points this week against Leeds and Crystal Palace that is over and above what Zinchenko will do against Fulham away this week in order to play with 9 men in game week 28 without playing Tarkowski against Chelsea away, which in all likelihood is probably going to be a 2-pointer from Tarkowski. Although Chelsea haven't been attacking too fluently, so potentially comes away with a clean sheet there, and that's a 6-pointer. Where I will be selling Tarkowski the following week anyway to bring in Estupinan in game week 29 for his relatively good defensive double of Brentford at home and Bournemouth away. It's tricky. It's really complicated. I'm not too sure. I think at the outset what I'm looking at here is probably Estupinan in this week is probably the better play because he has 2 full games in order to hopefully rack up as many points as possible. Zinchenko could quite easily come away with a clean sheet and an attacking return and could make this all kind of null and void though. Like I said, it's quite hard. The other alternative is, of course, bringing in someone like Rico Henry this week instead, who's got Everton away, Southampton away, 2 away fixtures. I'm not sold on the Brentford defence. It's not a great defensive team, but these are 2 teams that they could get a clean sheet against. However, both games are away from home, so that becomes maybe slightly less likely. Henry would then have a game in 28 at home to Leicester, which is great. So we're back to playing with 10 men this week. Still, though, we would have had to bench Zinchenko in this play as well. And then in the following week, in game week 29, I would not be making a transfer for the Estupiñán. The only player that I might be looking at doing that for is Zinchenko out at that point to bring in Estupiñán for their good defensive double. But what I have bought into, if I do go with Henry this week, is a double of Brighton away and Manchester United away. I think Brentford are going to concede in both of those fixtures, and so that does not seem to be as good of a play. Brentford, will they concede at home to Leicester? Probably. I would say that Leicester probably score then, and so bringing Henry in this week means that Henry would probably have to get 2 clean sheets in order to make this play the best points total across the next 3 game weeks. It's tricky, and as you can see by running through this set of sequences, very team dependent on what you do here. If you've already got a full playing 10 or 11 in game week 28 and you can safely bench an Estupiñán this week, or next week, or a Henry next week, then bringing in Estupiñán or Henry this game week might actually make a lot more sense, because you've got the extra double this week. You might not, in your teams out there, be having to make the decision to bench someone like Zinchenko, so you might have a way worse defender that you can actually put Estupiñán in for, and the total points gained across those 3 game weeks might actually work out a lot better for that run. So, long story short, I think you need at least 2 of the Brentford and Brighton players, Tony and 1 of McAllister, Matoma or Solly March. If you were going to load up on a 3rd or 4th doubler for this week, you do have to consider who you are taking out and benching in order to make that play. If I wanted to bring in, say, a Matoma, I would probably be looking at selling an Odegaard. Potentially that's the best play overall, even though whoever I bring in this week for this double will actually blank next week. So whoever you're looking to bring in this week, Brighton will get their 2 games this week, whereas Odegaard will still play 2 games, but it's 1 game this week, 1 game next week, where whoever from the Brighton unit that I bring in would be blanking next week. So it's 2 games for all of these players. It's just who has the best 2 fixtures, and then what impact does that have on your game week 29 bench boost if you are planning to bench boost in game week 29. Now, having said all that, there's the international break between game week 28 and game week 29 as well, and so all of these best laid plans could all be decimated by some injuries that come through across that international break, but that is the risk that we have to be running with. Anyone who wildcarded last week has a bit of a bigger risk because they've used their wildcard in order to do this, and so they will probably have to take some hits if they are still going to follow through with the bench boost in 29. If you still have held onto your wildcard, you do have some other alternative options to be considering. Now that's a lot of explaining. It's already half an hour in. I was going to go into the future plans about if you still held your wild card and held your free hits, or still have those 2 cards, chips, what is now the best optimal strategy. Without going into it into detail, I'll just say that the fact that the game week 32 blank is now a much kinder blank, it means that the doubles in game week 34 and game week 37 are a lot smaller. There is not as many teams doubling, and so bench boost looks most optimal to be used definitely in game week 29. The free hit, though, I was saying was probably going to be best used in one of those big doubles in 34 and 37, but those doubles are now no longer as big. I might be looking at wildcarding in game week 33 to load up on good doublers for the 34 and 37 double, and potentially using my free hit maybe in that small blank of game week 32, depending on what happens. There's other strategies. I could be dead ending a little bit earlier, wildcarding earlier to cover the 32 and holding on to that free hit, or maybe I can just get away with dead ending out of this bench boost in 29 in order to wildcard into a team where I just go through game week 32 unscathed with that free hit still in pocket. Now, if you did manage to hold on to your wildcard, I think you are in a really good position, because undoubtedly you've probably spread your funds across the pitch in order to build for this bench boost in 29. Wildcarding out of this bench boost in 29 means that you will be able to jump on that threemium if that is what you're planning to do. That is what my plan is. The threemium has been working really well since game week 17. It was even probably the best play well before the World Cup. I think it is still the best play to ride out the rest of the season. So if you're dispersing your funds across the pitch, you can wildcard, once you've done that, back into a threemium setup to ride out the rest of the season and jump on some fixture swings for the likes of potentially Liverpool, who look like they have a couple of good doubles and a pretty nice run out to the end of the season. Well, that's it for today's video. If you did make it this far through the video, please do consider giving it a like. And if you are new around here, hit that big red subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified about more FPL content coming your way. And until next time, I'll catch you again shortly. Cheers.